We now interrupt this true crime radio broadcast for a special bulletin. Stay tuned to this frequency for Murder, Mystery, and History, the old-time radio program that digs up the past to uncover the truth. Tonight's chilling tale spans oceans of ink and mountains of evidence. A crime that stopped a nation's heart. The case that gave us the trial of the century. So turn down the lights and listen closely. For now, the microphone is passed to a man who knows every shadow, every clue, every motive. The host of this hour, Mr. Murder. March 1st, 1932. The most famous man in the world wakes up to a silence so loud it echoes across a continent. A nursery window is open. A crib is empty. And left behind is a ransom note and the crude handmade ladder that climbed into American legend. This is where modern crime begins. Not in the shadows of an alley, but in the spotlight of global fame. This is the story of the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, a story of a hero, a haunting, a circus of a trial, and the man in the electric chair, Bruno Richard Hauptmann. They called it the trial of the century, but I'm here to show you the blueprint, the forensic hunt, the media frenzy, the doubt that never dies. This is how a nation hunts a monster. To truly grasp the magnitude of the shock that rippled across America, you first have to understand who Charles Lindbergh was. He wasn't merely another famous figure. He was something else entirely. A living legend elevated to near mythic status by the public. Known as the Lone Eagle, Lindbergh had achieved what many thought impossible. He flew solo and non-stop across the vast Atlantic Ocean, carving his name into history and the national psyche. By 1932, he wasn't simply admired, he was revered, an untouchable icon who embodied American ingenuity and courage. His life resembled royalty more than celebrity. His home, a secluded modernist castle nestled in Hopewell, New Jersey's quiet hills. On that fateful Tuesday night in March, when shadows seemed to stretch endlessly across the estate's manicured grounds, everything changed forever. Around 10 p.m., Betty Gow, the nurse responsible for young Charles Lindbergh Jr., peeked into the nursery. The toddler was peacefully asleep in his crib, safe and sound beneath soft blankets. But within just 30 minutes, a mere heartbeat later, the unthinkable happened. He vanished without a trace. A window stood ajar in the cool spring air. Outside on the sill lay evidence of intrusion, muddy footprints smeared on polished wood. And perched chillingly on that windowsill was a single sealed envelope. Inside that envelope, a ransom note scrawled in strange, stilted English, riddled with bizarre circles and hash marks instead of recognizable signatures. The demand felt almost theatrical. $50,000 for safe return, a staggering sum then, equivalent to almost $1 million today, underscoring both desperation and calculation behind this crime. The message carried an unmistakable threat: involve law enforcement and pay with your child's life. But it's here we encounter perhaps the most haunting detail of all, the one piece of physical evidence destined to cast its long shadow over every investigation that followed: the ladder. This wasn't some standard household implement, but a haphazard contraption cobbled together from North Carolina pine boards, a crude three-piece affair designed solely for this grim purpose. Under its user's weight, it snapped. One rung shattered on Lindbergh's pristine lawn like broken trust itself. More than just an instrument for entry or escape, this battered ladder became an eerie calling card left by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, or wanted others to believe they did. The police arrived almost immediately, but found themselves outmatched at every turn by circumstances so extraordinary they bordered on surrealism. Officers trampled vital clues into oblivion as they swarmed over flower beds and through corridors. Well-meaning family members were allowed to clean up before investigators could document key details. Chaos reigned before order could even take root. A circus before any performers had officially taken their places. Already you could see history drafting its own blueprint. A beloved celebrity at center stage. Investigative missteps stacking up like dominoes. Reporters circling hungrily above tragedy like vultures spotting fresh carrion below. For newsmen everywhere, this story was pure gold, the kind you chase for lifetimes, and nothing would stop them from telling it again and again until America itself couldn't look away if it tried. Into this chaos stepped, well, everyone with a tip, a theory, or an angle. The Lindbergh Kidnapping dominated headlines and captured the public's imagination like no crime before it. Tips poured in from all corners of the country, some heartfelt attempts to help, others mere noise in an already deafening storm. Predictably, con men and opportunists emerged from the shadows, eager to exploit the tragedy for personal gain. Even Al Capone reached out from his prison cell in Chicago, offering his services to recover the child in exchange for his own release. Desperation clouded judgment. The Lindberghs actually considered Capone's brazen proposal. But amid this frenzy of false leads and opportunistic grifters, one figure stood out. A 72-year-old retired school principal from the Bronx named John F. Condon, known by his self-appointed alias, Jafsie. Driven by civic duty or perhaps a flair for drama, history is undecided, Condon placed a bold public advertisement in a local newspaper offering himself as an intermediary between Lindbergh and whoever had taken his son. To everyone's astonishment and horror, the kidnapper responded. Thus began one of history's most bizarre correspondences. Cryptic letters exchanged between Jafsie and the shadowy abductor, each note laced with coded phrases and theatrical paranoia. Condon quickly became the public face of these tense negotiations. Lindbergh himself watched grimly as events unfolded, but reluctantly gave his approval to Jafsie's involvement. The kidnapper's instructions were elaborate, a mix of cloak and dagger theatrics and genuine fear of capture. The ransom was painstakingly assembled. $50,000 made up mostly of gold certificates whose serial numbers were meticulously recorded by authorities. A clever move intended to trace any future use of these marked bills. Then came that fateful night when Condon was summoned alone to a desolate Bronx cemetery under cover of darkness. He later described meeting a nervous man lurking among gravestones, a man with a heavy German accent who called himself John. In this eerie setting straight out of Gothic fiction, Condon handed over 2 small wooden boxes packed with cash while receiving nothing more than another cryptic note, promising that little Charles Jr., alive and well, awaited rescue aboard a boat called Nellie, anchored off Martha's Vineyard. It was all smoke and mirrors, a cruel deception atop cruelty itself. Days turned into weeks filled with frantic searching along windswept shores and shadowy harbors. Every inch combed yielded nothing but heartbreak. Then, on May 12th, came horror beyond words. A truck driver passing through woods scarcely 5 miles from the Lindbergh estate stumbled upon the decomposed remains of a small child partially buried beneath leaves, the unmistakable evidence that Hope had died weeks before anyone realized it. The coroner concluded that death likely resulted from a skull fracture sustained during or shortly after abduction, the fall from that makeshift ladder now infamous in every American household. With discovery came transformation. The case shifted overnight, from desperate rescue mission to relentless pursuit for justice, or perhaps vengeance. And amidst fading footprints and vanishing clues stood only one tangible lead, those marked bills circulating somewhere out there, invisible breadcrumbs leading through America's underworld toward whoever dared snatch America's baby from its cradle into legend and infamy forevermore. The investigation went cold for more than 2 years, fading into the background of daily life as the public's attention shifted elsewhere. Though a nation grieved and eventually moved on, the investigators never did. Doggedly persistent, they kept following leads, focusing especially on those elusive gold certificates that had been part of the ransom payment. Then, on September 15th, 1934, a stroke of luck, or perhaps fate, breathed new life into the case. At a modest gas station in the Bronx, an attendant accepted a $10 gold certificate from a customer paying for gas. Trusting his instincts, and perhaps sensing something was off, he made a careful note. He scribbled down the license plate number directly onto the bill itself, just in case this ordinary transaction turned out to be important. That seemingly routine act proved monumental. It was one of the ransom bills investigators had been hunting for years. The license plate led police straight to Bruno Richard Hauptmann, a German immigrant who worked as a carpenter in New York. When authorities arrested Hauptmann, he had another piece of damning evidence on him, a $20 ransom bill from that same infamous batch. Hauptmann tried to explain it away. He claimed it was all money entrusted to him by an acquaintance named Isidore Fish, a friend who'd conveniently returned to Germany and died shortly thereafter. But detectives weren't convinced by this alibi, especially after their search turned up more than $14,000 of Lindbergh ransom money stashed away in Hauptmann's garage. This was modern law enforcement at work. Follow the money trail until you find your suspect. But even with all this cash in evidence bags, prosecutors knew they needed more. They needed proof linking Hauptmann directly to that lonely house where Charles Lindbergh Jr. had disappeared. Enter forensic science, the new frontier in criminal investigation at that time, and evidence destined to become both legendary and hotly debated for decades afterwards. The prosecution unveiled their ace, Arthur Kohler, an expert on wood whose meticulous study bordered on obsession. For 2 painstaking years, Kohler analyzed every inch and splinter of that makeshift kidnap ladder left behind at the crime scene. He traced its North Carolina pine back through lumber mills with almost detective-like precision. Not only did he identify its origin point at a specific mill, but also matched unique planer marks etched into each rail with machinery used at one particular lumber yard, the very same supplier patronized by Bruno Hauptmann's employer. But Kohler wasn't finished yet. He delivered what would become known as his coup de grace during dramatic testimony. While examining Hauptmann's attic floorboards back at his home, he found one conspicuous gap, a missing plank where there should have been solid flooring. Kohler dismantled rail number 16 from the kidnap ladder and compared it against wood samples from Hauptmann's attic. Incredibly, down to its grain pattern and cut marks, it fit perfectly with that missing board. In other words, part of Bruno Hauptmann's house quite literally became part of Lindbergh's tragedy. As if this weren't enough for jurors or headlines hungry for certainty, The handwriting experts entered next like vultures circling over fresh prey, unequivocally declaring that handwriting found on various ransom notes matched samples taken from Hauptmann himself. In short order, and in front-page terms, the case appeared sealed tight as a drum. Here stood their man, a carpenter caught red-handed with thousands in ransom money hidden at home. Woodwork from his own attic fashioned into criminal tools. Handwriting unmistakably scrawled onto extortion letters read round the world. To police and public alike, it seems there could be no doubt who committed the crime of the century. The trial in Flemington, New Jersey wasn't so much a legal proceeding as it was a national festival of outrage, a spectacle that blurred the line between justice and entertainment. Reporters filled the streets, broadcasting every twist and turn, live via radio, bringing the drama directly into American homes. Hawkers crowded the courthouse steps, selling souvenirs, buttons, pins, and even postcards, turning the grim event into an opportunity for profit. The carnival atmosphere was so pervasive that onlookers dubbed it the Flemington Circus, as if justice itself had taken center stage beneath a big top. Bruno Richard Hauptmann sat stoic throughout it all, a figure marked by his heavy German accent and unwavering demeanor. He steadfastly maintained his innocence to anyone who would listen. His defense relied on what became known as the Fish story, that the ransom money belonged to Isidore Fish, an acquaintance who had since died. Any incriminating evidence was mere coincidence or fabrication. The wood allegedly matched to his attic? A fluke of fate. The handwriting analysis tying him to ransom notes. It could have been forged by someone else entirely. Hauptmann's lawyers highlighted glaring problems. A sloppy initial investigation plagued with errors and contaminated evidence that should have cast doubt on any straightforward narrative of guilt. Yet Hauptmann faced more than just legal hurdles. He confronted the ghostly legacy of America's golden child, little Charles Lindbergh Jr., son of national hero Charles Lindbergh. When Lindbergh himself took the stand and dramatically declared that Hauptmann's voice was unmistakably that of the kidnapper he'd heard in the cemetery that fateful night, it became more than testimony. It became gospel in the eyes of many Americans. Here stood a living legend accusing a jobless immigrant. It was David versus Goliath in reverse. Although some pieces of evidence appeared scientifically impressive at first glance, the wooden ladder-rung matchup felt compelling. Their certainty dissolved under scrutiny. Was this wood truly unique enough for such damning proof? Handwriting analysis was notorious for its subjectivity even then. Reasonable experts could, and did, disagree about its validity as solid evidence linking Hauptmann to crime-ridden correspondence. Notably absent from his past was any record suggesting violence or criminality. Was Bruno Richard Hauptmann truly a lone wolf capable of such horror, or merely an unlucky scapegoat caught in history's crosshairs? Despite these lingering doubts swirling through both courtroom and country alike, they failed to sway 12 jurors pressed under public expectation's weighty thumb. After 11 tense hours behind closed doors, they emerged with their decision. Guilty of murder in the first degree, a verdict carrying an irrevocable sentence. On April 3, 1936, at New Jersey State Prison's electric chair chamber, Bruno Richard Hauptmann met his fate beneath humming wires and unrelenting headlines. His final words echoed softly yet defiantly against history. I am innocent. The case was closed. But the story was just beginning. The Lindbergh kidnapping left two indelible marks on America, shaping its legal landscape and cultural psyche for generations to come. First, there was the law, Public outrage over the shocking crime, America's golden child snatched from his nursery, sparked a firestorm that Congress couldn't ignore. In response to this unprecedented act and the frenzied media coverage that followed, lawmakers passed the Lindbergh Law, officially known as the Federal Kidnapping Act. This landmark legislation transformed kidnapping from a state-level concern into a federal crime, giving J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, his famous G-men, the authority to intervene across state lines. Suddenly, it wasn't just local police chasing shadows. It was a nationwide dragnet, setting in motion the modern paradigm of federal-level manhunts we recognize today whenever headlines scream about fugitives on the run. Second, and just as significant, the case became a blueprint for America's enduring obsession with true crime. The Lindbergh saga had all the ingredients: celebrity tragedy, an unsolvable forensic puzzle, an electrifying trial broadcast coast to coast, and most enduringly of all, the lingering doubt that refused to die. It created a template. Not only did Americans learn to crave every twist and turn of high-profile cases, but they also learned to dissect evidence like amateur sleuths and question verdicts long after juries retired. And that doubt, it's never gone away. If anything, it has multiplied with time. Conspiracy theories have flourished in this fertile soil of uncertainty. Was Hauptmann merely a scapegoat or part of some shadowy gang? Was Charles Lindbergh himself, a man known for his eccentricities, involved in some ill-fated plot gone terribly awry? Or perhaps key pieces of evidence, like that infamous attic board supposedly matching Hauptmann's home, were planted by overzealous cops, desperate under national pressure to solve what had become the crime of the century. We'll never know for sure. History has locked those secrets away beyond our reach. The so-called trial of the century delivered what looked like closure, a definitive legal answer handed down from judge and jury. But history itself is unruly. It deals not in absolutes, but in shadows and questions left unresolved. The narrative America accepted at face value was neat. Heroic aviator father wronged by fate, monstrous foreigner brought swiftly to justice, equilibrium restored. But real history is rarely so tidy or comforting. It hides in unexpected places, in the grain patterns of an old piece of wood held up as evidence before gasping crowds, in faded serial numbers on ransom bills unearthed years later at corner stores, or perhaps most hauntingly, in Bruno Hauptmann's stubborn silence, a man who went stoically to his death, claiming he'd been nothing more than an unlucky carpenter caught up in someone else's storm. The Lindbergh case taught America how to hunt monsters lurking on its front pages, and how quickly fear can convince us we've found one when we're desperate enough for closure or catharsis. In searching for answers outside ourselves, we sometimes lose sight of how easily justice can be shaped, or misshaped, by collective need rather than individual guilt. What do you think? Did they get the right man? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more twisted history, more deep dives into the cases that shaped our world, make sure you're subscribed. Because the past is never really past.